Hey everyone, welcome to the Genuine Learning Blog. I am Peter Zender, and today we're going to take a look at the presentation of retainage in financial statements for construction contractors. Now, I know what you might be thinking, Peter. I am not involved in that industry. I'm not involved with construction clients. I do not have any involvement in contractor reporting. I'm tuning out, and I would just say, hold up, hold up, hold up. Even if you aren't involved in this industry, I do think that this is an interesting example of how even when there are required disclosures, required presentation on the face of the financials, there can still be gaps and real confusion for financial statement users. So if you want to see an example, I think that this fact pattern could exist for other industries as well. So stick around. Background here, this was an issue the Private Company Council identified based on feedback from users of the financial statements. Initially, there was some discussion about whether new standards should be put in place, but ultimately, it was decided to issue the staff paper by the FASB in April 2025. Now, before we get into the components of that staff paper, let's get back to basics here. Let's do a quick refresher on what retainage is. So in long-term construction projects, customers often worry that contractors might complete most of the job, the big components of the job, but walk away before finishing the final punch list. And as someone who's had a contractor take over 2 years to finish a small master bedroom renovation, I can confirm that those customer concerns are real. So to help ensure follow through, construction contracts often include retainage, where a portion of the payment, typically 5 to 10%, is excluded. It's earned by the contractor, but withheld until the entire project is complete. Again, designed to motivate the contractor to stick it out until the end. Now, from an accounting standpoint, this creates time gaps in cash flow, gaps in timing of revenue recognition. And Topic 606 doesn't actually provide any specific guidance on retainage. It's generally just included in contract assets or contract liabilities. And that's where this educational paper comes in. It clarifies how retainage fits with current presentation rules and suggests some optional voluntary items that financial statement preparers could include to give users a clearer picture of how retainage impacts those balances. Let's look at an example here of how presentation on the face of the financial statements currently look. So typically, when it comes to retainage, you would only see this potentially. We've got our contract assets, contract liabilities in those gray lines. But within these balances, we could have conditional retainage included, as well as other items like revenue in excess of billings and billings in excess of revenue. And understanding what's in this mix helps give users of the financial statements valuable insight into the contractor's operations. So what are some of those insights? Well, performance and project completion insights. So because retainage represents work performed but not yet paid, a large balance could indicate projects that are nearly complete or delays in project closeouts. That second item there, creditworthiness and collectability, high or aging retainage balances could raise red flags for lenders or sureties, suggesting potential payment issues from customers or customer disputes due to incomplete or substandard work by the contractor. And then the third item there, additionally, retainage impacts comparability across the industry, helping users assess revenue recognition practices, project management and collection effectiveness, and the amount of capital tied up into ongoing work. So very, very valuable information for a user of the financial statements. So let's talk what the specific GAAP requirements are. And we're going to focus on private companies. There would be a lot more for public entities, but let's stick to the basic requirements here. So under Topic 606, contract assets and liabilities must present net, meaning that on a contract by contract basis, you combine revenue in excess of billings or billings in excess of revenue and retainage. So say you've got an excess billing of $2 million and retainage of $1 million. Well, you offset that, you net it and show the $1 million amount under contract liabilities. That's why we saw earlier retainage can be included in both contract assets and contract liabilities, even though it's technically earned kind of like a receivable by the contractor. Now, Topic 606 also requires disclosure of both the opening and closing balances of contract assets and liabilities. And then the big kicker is that third bullet point. So when it comes to retainage, there is guidance in Section 910, Contractors, Construction, that includes the requirement for a specific disclosure around retainage. It mandates disclosure of the total retainage amount, the portion expected to be collected after 1 year, and if possible, the specific years in which collection is expected. And at this point, you might be saying, Peter, that sounds like exactly what users of the financial statements would want. Clear info on retainage. What more do they need? Well, here's the issue. Even though we have this disclosure and we have the items on the face of the financial statements, the reconciliation between the two can get a little murky. Here's an example. So we have our face of the financial statements presentation, contract assets, contract liabilities. We've got our example footnote disclosure. Now, the issue here is it's really difficult to reconcile the amounts from the footnote disclosure into the face of the financial statements because of all the netting that's occurring that we talked about on the previous slide. And so, you run into issues where the users can't figure out how does this fit into the larger picture of the face of the financials. You could argue too, if the retainage amounts, if those specific amounts are buried in disclosure, it can add additional effort for the users of the financial statements to figure out what those amounts are. There's always inefficiencies when I have to hop around to different places in a document or to different documents, right? So what is the paper suggesting? It provides some voluntary, I'm going to repeat that, voluntary options for preparers of the financial statements to improve reporting. The first item they mention is parenthetical disclosure for the contract and contract liability line items to break out and present retainage there. So for example, instead of just saying contract assets, you can include additional information like including conditional retainage of dollar amount and dollar amount at the years presented in the financials. So we make it very clear for the users what that retainage amount is. You could also use subtotals. We saw an example of this earlier where we had our line item, right? Our contract asset and contract liability line items. And then down below, we included the specific subtotals that made up those total amounts. Again, it was the retainage amount, conditional retainage, as well as those billings in excess of revenue and revenue in excess of billings. Third bullet point here, this is just kind of a suggestion around descriptions for contract assets and liabilities. You do not have to explicitly use those descriptions. You could say things like excess of billings or billings in excess of revenue instead. When you do that, though, you just have to make sure that you provide sufficient information to distinguish between contract assets and receivables. So it allows for us to tweak the wording to make it a little clear what specifically is being talked about. Final kind of suggestion from the paper, and I don't know if this actually solves the buried in disclosures issue that I mentioned before, but the paper does offer, again, that voluntary option to expand disclosures to help users better reconcile retainage with contract assets and liabilities. These optional disclosures could include revenue recognized that was previously deferred, a reconciliation or comparison of performance timing versus payment timing, and then a qualitative and quantitative informational summary about changes in contract assets and liabilities, including retainage. Again, all of this to better help reconcile between the required disclosure and the face of the financial statements. But hey, that's our blog. If you are a construction or contractor industry auditor or an accountant, hopefully this gave you some food for thought on financial reporting. If not, maybe it still served as, I don't know if fun's the right word, but a fun case study in how users push for greater clarity in financial presentation and how there can be confusion, even if we have those required disclosures and the required presentation. But either way, thank you for tuning in and happy debiting and crediting, everyone.